The frost cracked under her boots like tiny bones. Each step toward the empty corral released the smell of old hay and disturbed earth, sharp in the pre-dawn stillness. Wind, raw and smelling of distant snow, moaned through the gaps in the weathered boards, making the empty stable behind her sigh. It was that hour before color returned to the world, when shadows pooled thick and deep, and the only warmth came from the weak bulb above the feed-room door, casting a jaundiced circle on the frozen ground. Empty. The word echoed louder then. The wind. Not just the corral, but the house, the land, the hollow space behind her ribs where her father's laughter used to live. Maggie pulled her worn jacket tighter, the canvas rough against her cheek. She hadn't slept. Sleep meant silence, and silence meant remembering the hospital room's antiseptic hush, the terrible fragility of his hand in hers. 3 months. The ranch felt less like home and more like a museum of absence. His coffee mug sat unwashed by the sink. His favorite saddle, oiled and ready, gathered dust in the tack room. She came out here most mornings now, drawn by the habit of chores, but mostly to stand where the life had been loudest, to feel the cold seep in, a counterpoint to the numbness inside. Then, movement. Not from the barn where the two aging quarter. Horses dozed, but from the large holding pen beyond the main corral, shrouded in the lingering dark. A shifting mass, a restless energy contained. The BLM horses, brought in yesterday from the high desert roundup. A chaotic, dusty operation she'd watched with a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Men on ATVs, helicopters thudding, low, driving the terrified band down treacherous slopes. Panicked whinnies cutting through the engine roar. She'd seen the stumble, the flash of dun hide disappearing over a shale ledge, the frantic pursuit. One separated, one captured last, wild-eyed and trembling, foam flecking its muzzle. He stood apart, not cowering in the corner like some, not pacing the fence line with frantic energy. He stood statue still in the deepest shadow of the holding, pen, head lowered slightly but not in submission. In assessment. A dark bay Mustang, almost black in the gloom, his coat rough and matted in places. What caught the weak light, what held Maggie's gaze and wouldn't let go, wasn't his size. He was rangy, built for distance, not corrals, but the stark, jagged white scar that tore a path down his left shoulder. Old, healed, but brutal. A testament. And his eyes. Even across the distance, in the half-light, they weren't just wary. They were ancient. Deep pools of obsidian reflecting the cold bulb light, holding centuries of sky and wind and the instinctual knowledge of predators. He watched her, not the pen, not the other milling horses. Just her. The stillness around him was profound, a quiet vortex in the nervous energy of the captured herd. He breathed slowly, deliberately, nostrils flaring wide, taking in her scent on the frigid air. He didn't belong here, in this pen of dust and fear. He belonged to the ragged horizon, the wind-scoured mesas. Maggie didn't plan to move closer. It was against protocol. Wild horses needed space, time. Her father's voice, gentle but firm, echoed, "Respect the flight, Maggie. It's all they know." But her feet carried her anyway, drawn by that stillness, that scar, the unbearable weight of her own emptiness seeking something. Not solace. Maybe. Recognition. She stopped at the heavy wooden rail of the holding pen, well back. The other horses startled, bunching together, snorting warnings. The bay didn't flinch. His ears, tipped with black like burnt velvet, swiveled forward, pinning her location. His gaze never wavered. She could see the tension coiled in his neck muscles, the slight tremor along his flank. Ready. Always ready to run. She didn't speak. Words felt clumsy, intrusive in the silent dialogue between them. She simply stood. Let him see her. Let him smell the hay dust on her clothes, the lingering scent of coffee, the grief that felt like a physical odor clinging to her skin. She mirrored his stillness, breathing slow and deep, trying to project calm she didn't feel. Minutes stretched, measured only by the plume of her breath in the air and the rhythmic puff of vapor from his nostrils. The wind caught a strand of her hair, whipping it across her face. His ears flickered, tracking the movement. A small thing, but it felt like contact. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she lifted her hand from her side, not reaching out, just letting it hang, palm open and empty, at her hip, showing him. See? Nothing. His head lifted a fraction, neck arching slightly. A soft, questioning snort escaped him, barely audible over the wind. He shifted his weight, one front hoof lifting and settling back into the frozen earth. Not retreating, considering. The intensity of his focus was a physical pressure. She felt laid bare, her loneliness, her raw edges, all visible under that dark, unblinking gaze. It wasn't judgment she saw. It was acknowledgement. A shared understanding of fractured things. The sky was lightening now, a thin band of bruised purple edging the eastern hills. The weak bulb overhead seemed to dim in comparison. Maggie knew she should leave, start the real chores, feed the quarter horses, face the empty house. But her feet were rooted. The cold bit through her jeans, but she barely registered it. The bay took a single step. Not towards her, but parallel to the fence, his movement fluid, powerful even in confinement. He stopped again, closer to the rail where she stood, perhaps 10 feet away now. He stretched his neck out, nostrils working overtime, drawing her scent in deep, long pulls. His breath, warm and smelling of sage and dust, clouded the air between them. He lowered his head slightly, not submissive, but investigative. His whiskers brushed the rough wood of the top rail. His dark eye, so close now, held a depth that felt bottomless. It wasn't trust, not yet. It was a fragile truce, a suspension of flight. Without thinking, driven by an impulse deeper than reason, Maggie whispered, "Not his name." He had none, she knew. Not a command. Just a sound, soft as the sighing wind. "Hey!" It hung in the cold air. His ear closest to her flicked back, then forward again. He didn't retreat. He exhaled, a long, slow stream of vapor that mingled with hers. His muzzle, dark and velvety, dipped fractionally lower, almost touching the rail near her hand. She didn't move her hand. She held her breath. He stood there, breathing her air, the scar on his shoulder a pale slash in the gathering dawn. The other horses had settled, their nervous energy dissipating. The world narrowed to this frozen rail, this wounded creature breathing softly into the space between them, and the hollow ache inside her that suddenly felt less empty, less alone. She didn't know why she whispered to him. She didn't know why the sight of that scar felt like a key turning in a rusted lock deep inside her chest. She didn't know why, when she finally made herself turn away, her boots crunching on the frost towards the feed room, the sound of her own movement was followed by the soft, deliberate thud of hooves on packed earth. Not frantic, not fleeing, just following. Keeping pace along the inside of the fence line, matching her step for step, his dark, watchful eye never leaving her back. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, a question hanging unanswered in the cold new light. Why did the horse with the sky in his eyes choose to follow the girl with the winter in her heart? The days bled into weeks, each dawn finding Maggie at the fence line. The bay Mustang, her Mustang, though she'd never dared call him that, not even in her thoughts, became her silent shadow. He no longer stood frozen in the pen's deepest shadows. He waited, a dark sentinel near the rails where she first stood, his obsidian eyes tracking her approach long before her boots crunched on the frost. The other horses had been shipped out, leaving an echoing emptiness in the holding pen, amplifying his solitary presence. He remained, unclaimed, unadoptable, the BLM agent had said tersely, eyeing the jagged scar, the untamed fire still banked deep in that watchful gaze. Too much history, too much wild. Maggie didn't argue. She just brought hay, fresh water, and her quiet presence. She learned his language, the subtle flick of an ear when she spoke softly, the way his nostrils flared wide and soft when she approached, inhaling her like a promise. She named him, finally, in the privacy of her own heart, Cimarron, wild one, untamed. It fit the scar, the ancient eyes, the way he moved with the fluid grace of wind over rock. But Cimarron carried secrets. It wasn't just wariness, it was recognition, a flicker of something deep and unsettling. It started subtly. Maggie was mending a bridle in the tack room one gray afternoon, the smell of leather oil thick in the air. Her father's old workbench was cluttered with tools, memories embedded in every scratch and stain. She hummed absently, an old cowboy ballad her dad used to sing while fixing gear. Across the wide Missouri, the moment the words left her lips, a sharp, high-pitched whinny shattered the quiet from outside, not the usual snort or nicker. A sound ripped from the throat, startled, almost pained. Maggie dropped the bridle, rushing to the window. Cimarron stood rigid at the fence line, head high, ears pinned flat back, eyes wide and white-ringed. He was staring not at her, but past her, towards the open tack room door, nostrils flared violently. The song. It was the song. He trembled, every muscle taut, ready to explode. Then, as suddenly as it began, the tension snapped. He blew out a hard breath, shook his head violently as if dislodging a fly, and paced a tight, agitated circle before stopping, head lowered, breathing hard. Maggie's own heart hammered against her ribs. What did that song mean to you? Another time, she led one of the placid quarter horses past his pen towards the lower pasture. The quarter horse, old and docile, ambled slowly. Cimarron watched. Head low, ears relaxed. Then Maggie picked up a coiled lasso hanging on a post, not to use, just to move it out of the way. A low, rumbling growl vibrated from Cimarron's chest, a sound she'd never heard from a horse. Deep, primal, dangerous. His head snapped up, eyes blazing, focused solely on the rope in her hand. He backed away, snorting, the scar stark white against his dark coat. Maggie froze, ice water flooding her veins. Ropes, roundup, capture, pain. The pieces clicked with chilling clarity. The most unnerving moment came near the old apple tree. It stood sentinel at the edge of the yard, its gnarled branches heavy, with late-season fruit. Maggie often sat beneath it on an upturned bucket, shelling peas or just watching Cimarron. One crisp morning, she found a single windfall apple, small and slightly bruised. On impulse, she walked towards the fence, holding it out flat on her palm. Cimarron watched her approach, ears forward, curious but cautious. He stretched his neck, sniffed the apple, then delicately lipped it from her hand. As he crunched it, a rare softness seemed to ease the lines of his powerful jaw. Maggie smiled, a small, tentative thing. "Good boy," she murmured, the words unfamiliar, rusty on her tongue. She turned to grab her bucket, her boot scuffing against something half buried in the damp earth beneath the apple tree. A flash of worn leather. She bent down, brushing away the dirt. It was an old broken spur strap, nothing special, except for the tiny, intricate carving on the buckle, a stylized M, intertwined with a horseshoe. Her father's mark. He'd carved it on everything he loved. A wave of grief, fresh and sharp, washed over her. She clutched the cold leather, remembering his big, calloused hands working leather, humming that damned ballad. She sank onto the bucket, the spur strap a lead weight in her hand. The dam she'd built so carefully, brick by brick since the hospital, began to crack. Not the slow leak of lonely nights, but a catastrophic rupture. The image of her father, frail in that sterile bed, his hands too weak to hold hers properly, the sound of the machines, the suffocating silence after they turned them off, the unbearable emptiness of the ranch, the loneliness that ate at her like acid. It wasn't just sadness. It was a howling void, a raw, ragged wound she'd tried desperately to ignore. The spur strap, his mark, found here, under the tree where Cimarron had just accepted her offering. It was too much. The connection, the unanswered questions about the horse, the overwhelming weight of her loss, it crashed down. A sob tore from her throat, raw and ugly. Then another. She folded in on herself, shoulders shaking, tears pouring hot and unchecked down her face, dripping onto the worn leather in her hand. She cried for her father. She cried for the terrifying emptiness. She cried for the bewildered, scarred creature watching her from the pen. The grief was a physical storm, racking her body, stealing her breath. She was utterly exposed, broken open on the cold ground beneath the apple tree. She didn't hear him approach. Not a hoofbeat, not a snort. Just a sudden immense warmth radiating beside her. She flinched, lifting her tear-streaked face. Cimarron stood there, not at the fence. Outside the fence. He must have jumped it, an impossible feat she'd never seen him attempt, silent as a shadow. He stood less than an arm's length away, his massive shoulder parallel to her hunched form. He didn't nuzzle. He didn't whinny. He simply stood, immovable, solid as the mountains he came from. His head was lowered, his breath warm and steady, puffing slow clouds into the cold air near her cheek. His dark eye, inches from hers, held. No alarm, no judgment. Only a deep, fathomless calm. A profound, wordless understanding. He breathed. In, out. Deep, measured, anchoring breaths. The rhythm was hypnotic, a counterpoint to her ragged gasps. The heat radiating from his body seeped into her chilled bones. The sheer, silent presence of him, this wild creature who had witnessed chaos, who bore his own brutal scar, standing guard over her breaking, it was a lifeline thrown across an abyss. Slowly, painfully, the storm within her began to subside. The sobs softened to shudders, then to quiet tears, then to exhausted stillness. She leaned her forehead, tentatively, against the solid warmth of his shoulder. He didn't move. He simply breathed, stood, held the space for her until the last tremor faded, until the void inside felt, not filled, but somehow contained, bearable. He stayed until her own breathing slowed, matching his steady rhythm, a silent vigil, a shared scar. Weeks turned, the land softening under a tentative spring sun. The transformation wasn't loud. It was in the quiet details. Maggie still visited Cimarron at dawn, but the ritual felt lighter. She'd talk, not just whisper. Mundane things. The price of feed, the stubborn tractor, the first meadowlark song. He'd listen, ears swiveling, sometimes blowing softly through his nostrils as if commenting. She noticed he no longer startled at the distant hum of machinery, only tracked it with wary interest. The frantic edge was gone from his movements, replaced by a watchful calm. His coat, brushed regularly now, gleamed dark and rich, the old scar a silvered map of survival, not just pain. One soft evening, weeks after the storm beneath the apple tree, Maggie was late to bring his hay. Dusk was painting the sky in lavender, and peach as she hurried across the yard, arms laden. Cimarron stood waiting, not at his usual spot near the fence, but by the gate she'd recently reinforced. The gate that led out of the pen, towards the open acres of the ranch beyond the corrals. He watched her approach, then turned deliberately and nudged the heavy gate latch with his muzzle. A soft, insistent clunk. Maggie stopped, hay forgotten. "You want out?" she breathed. It wasn't a demand, it was a question, a request. His dark eye held hers, steady, expectant. Not the look of a panicked wild thing, the look of a partner. Slowly, heart pounding for reasons that weren't fear, Maggie set down the hay. She walked to the gate, her fingers trembling only slightly as she worked the latch. It swung open with a creak. Cimarron didn't bolt. He stepped through, deliberate, majestic, tasting the freedom of the wider space. He walked a few paces, then stopped, looking back at her. Waiting. Maggie followed, her boots silent on the new grass. He led her, not towards the open range, but around the back of the old barn, towards a slope she rarely climbed, choked with wild sage and rabbit brush. The setting sun gilded everything in gold. He stopped near a cluster of boulders, nudging a patch of earth with his nose, then looked back at her, his gaze intense. Maggie knelt. The earth was loose. She brushed it aside with her fingers. Not deep, just beneath the surface, wrapped in oilcloth, brittle but intact. A small bundle. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. Inside lay a single photograph, faded and curled at the edges. Her breath caught. It was her father, decades younger, impossibly vibrant, astride a powerful dark bay horse. The horse's head was turned towards the camera, proud, intelligent, and bearing a jagged white scar down its left shoulder. Beside the photo was a small, hand-stitched leather pouch. She loosened the drawstring. Inside, a single perfect eagle feather and a smooth river stone carved with that same familiar M entwined with a horseshoe. Her father's treasures. Hidden. Waiting. She looked up at Cimarron. He stood bathed in the golden light, his scar gleaming, his eyes holding centuries of sky and an impossible gentle knowing. He hadn't just led her to objects. He'd led her to a truth. Her father hadn't just known this horse. He'd loved him, respected him, and somehow, impossibly, this wild heart had remembered. Remembered the man, remembered the song, remembered the place, and found his way back, through dust and helicopters and fences, not just to this land, but to her. Not to replace the man she lost, but to carry a piece of him forward, to show her that love, even love for a wild creature, could be a bridge across grief. That healing wasn't forgetting, but finding the strength to carry the memories without drowning. The last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of fire. Maggie stood, the photo and the pouch held close to her heart, the eagle feather brushing her wrist. She looked at Cimarron, truly looked at him. Not as a ghost of her father, but as himself, a survivor, a silent guardian, a bridge between her past and a future she could finally begin to imagine. He lowered his head, gently bumping her shoulder with his velvet muzzle, a soft puff of warm breath against her cheek, a benediction. She placed her hand on his neck, feeling the powerful muscle, the steady beat of his life beneath her palm. The wind whispered through the sage, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. The vast, starlit sky began to emerge overhead. Maggie took a deep, slow breath, the air clean and cool, filling lungs that no longer felt quite so hollow. The winter in her heart hadn't vanished, but under the watchful eye of the wild one who bore a scar like a map and carried the sky in his gaze, it had finally begun to thaw. She wasn't alone, not anymore. She had a keeper of memories, a creature forged in wilderness and resilience, walking beside her into the fragile, hopeful light of a new season. Sometimes the deepest rescues happen long after the chase ends. When a wild heart chooses to stay and shows you how to find your way home, if this story found a place in your heart, hit subscribe. Leave a comment below. Tell us what moved you, Tap that bell icon so you'll be here tomorrow and every day for the next true story that might just mend a piece of your world. We'll see you in the next video.